Hello, English 101. I'm going to put this up here so we can see each other a little bit better. I want to show you some slides on organization. It kind of brings together some of the stuff we talked about earlier in the week with what we're dealing with now with intro paragraphs and also thinking a little bit about conclusions. So without any further ado, I want to give you some idea of what's in this slideshow. We'll start by talking about how important the thesis statement is and how it sets up the organization for the rest of your paper. Including the reasons for your main idea. That's sometimes called the roadmap. I want to show you the relationship between thesis statements and topic sentences. They're connected, especially to that roadmap. I've got this really interesting thing about organization that psychologists call the peak end rule that I think will help you think about what order to put your evidence in. And then finally, some tips on intros and conclusions. So when you're thinking about writing a paper, the first thing that you use to organize your ideas is consider answering an interesting question. And we've gone over this quite a bit. What are the turning points in John Lewis's life? How did he become the person he became? And if you want something a little bit more challenging, what role did religion play in his life or in the civil rights movement, broadly speaking? And then we go about and we find the quotes for it. And you've been doing that. You did an exercise on topic sentences where you gathered those quotes together and then came up with an idea based on those quotes. So once you have all those pieces together, you want to start thinking, well, what do I want to say about it? And here's a definition of a thesis statement. It's the main idea or argument of your paper. Again, this is review from some of the things we talked about earlier in the week. Often provides a preview. We call that a roadmap sometimes. And a strong thesis statement is unique and offers something that's reasonable people can disagree with. It's as it says there, the rest of the essay should then defend that argument. I'll give you a chance to look at that last example. The roadmap step is the because. So I feel this way because, or the turning points in his life changed him to who he is. Here are those turning points. So these main ideas would be the roadmap, and each one of these would have a topic sentence. Those would be body paragraphs. A topic sentence is usually the first sentence in the paragraph that tells the reader or signals the reader what the paragraph's main idea is going to be. And this part's where you get this connection. The topic sentence, especially if you use a key term, should relate back to that thesis statement that you've used and summarize the key idea or main point of that paragraph. So you can see here, here's an example of a thesis statement about how to dress for a job interview. And each of these points, first point A, point B, and point C, lead to paragraph topic sentences. So this roadmap translates into these topic sentences. I think that really helps the writer know these signposts as they're coming up about what each thing's going to be. So how do you organize your support? So there are different ways to organize support. It could be chronological. That works really well for turning points. Could be spatial. That works really well in our essay for talking about panels or pages in a graphic novel. But you might also think about what's called the order of importance, with your second best point followed by maybe a weaker point and then having your best point be strongest. Here's the peak end rule that I discussed just at the beginning of this. And this has to do with customer experience, but think of your reader as a customer. This research shows how our brains work, and it suggests we make judgments based on the high point of the essay and the conclusion of the essay. And we often forget about the low point of the essay. So if this is your second best, your third best, and your best point, this is where we end up usually. We tend to forget that middle part. So if you have a part that you're unsure of, there's maybe a way for you to hide it in the middle and end on a really strong note. Let's see if I can go to the next one. Intros and conclusions. It'll have more detail on this in another slideshow about intros especially, but some notes on conclusions that I think will be helpful. And a lot of this is on the lesson plan for today as well. So as I said, your intro usually is written last. It contains these parts. It has this background information right here. This grabber we'll call a hook in our class. The background should be information that you give to somebody who hasn't read March or that maybe doesn't even know much about the civil rights movement. So you might want to explain this is the 1950s and 60s. You might want to explain that John Lewis became a congressman, so that you give some people some orientation, some ground that we all agree on and can understand, kind of like what we did with the stuff about nonviolence and the 50s civil rights movement and Brown versus Board of Education. Some background before they get into your main ideas. And then here's your main idea right here at the very end. This is called a grabber or a hook, as you can see right here. Excellent essay hooks. And as I said there's going to be some additional slides for this, but this is a nice infographic here that I found that reiterates some of the things that I like, starting with a question, having a strong statement, a fact or a statistic. That's kind of a did you know. Maybe start with a metaphor or a simile. I'll give you some examples of those later. A story or an anecdote. And then the last one, it says a description and a quotation hook. Quotation hooks work great, especially for a book where so many memorable things are said by such persuasive speakers like Lewis and Martin Luther King. Conclusions, and this is my main suggestion for conclusions. This can really, really be helpful. Whatever you say in the intro, link back up to it. Close the loop in the conclusion. So if you start with a quote, remind us of that quote or have a quote very similar to it in your conclusion. As it says there, people love it when you close the loop. Our brains, for some reason, feel very satisfied in an academic essay. In a novel or a poem or a short story, you might leave it open-ended or ambiguous, where you don't really know for sure how everything adds up, and you have to think about it a lot. There's subtext and symbolism. In an academic essay, we really like the idea that you've come full circle. So here are some ways to do it. If you start with a quote, remind us of it. If you begin with a story, like an anecdote, save the ending for the conclusion. If you have a surprising fact or statistic, remind us of it in the conclusion. If you began with a question, come back and answer that question in the conclusion. So you can see some examples in the intro of those styles of hooks, the sample intros that we posted earlier. Think about how you can use that again in your conclusion. Remind us where we started. Don't simply summarize your essay. So it's okay to add up the points or reiterate the points of your thesis statement or your roadmap, but don't just do that. I would avoid sort of wooden or cliche phrases like in conclusion or to sum up. They can sound kind of like filler. Work great in oral presentations, but in an academic essay, it's kind of obvious that we're at the last paragraph. And then don't apologize. Don't undercut yourself. Make sure that you end on us with some strength and some confidence. Okay, I think that's what I want to say about that right there. There'll be another set of slides that I'll put up here shortly about intros and a little bit more about conclusions.